a little bit late, so I want to make this a little bit shorter than usual. But I also, I don't want to change like the tour of what we usually do Sunday morning. Sunday morning is usually like inside, like a little bit more textual learning. So I want to try to do that, but focused in on the time that we're in right now. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of what I want to do for the next few minutes. So I want to do one of my favorite things in the world, which is to show how Pnimis HaTorah, how the secrets of Torah, how the Kisveri and so on, are not only amazing in their own right, but they also answer a lot of questions in Nigla. There's a lot of things, sort of brick walls that you hit even in Halacha, and it's sort of like, okay, so you leave Tzarchian, unanswered questions, things that that without Pnimis HaTorah you don't have the tools to even begin to answer. So I want to give an example of such a thing, a sugya that's relevant to the time that we're in right now, that I think could only really be explained with Pnimis HaTorah as well. Okay, so we know that we're counting the Sefira. It's called Sefiras HaOmer. So we know that what is the HaOmer? We're counting 2 from the HaOmer. What is the HaOmer? So very simple. We know that there's all different types of karbanos that were brought to the Beis Hamikdash, animals that were sacrificed, grains that were sacrificed as well. So the HaOmer was a flour offering, was a grain offering, a mincha, that was unique. It was brought on behalf of the Jewish people. It wasn't a private one. It was Klal Yisrael. It was brought on the second day of Pesach, right? Eretz Yisrael, it's the first day of HaOmer. And it was brought, what was unique, there's a few things that are unique to it. It was an offering that was made of barley, which is very unique. Not too many other karbanos were made from barley. Most of them are wheat. It was made of barley. That's the minchas HaOmer. And the pasuk says, so you bring that mincha on the second day of Pesach, and you begin to count 50 days. You count 49 days, and then on day 50, that's Chag HaShavuos, that's the Yontif of Shavuos. It's the mincha of the HaOmer. Okay, so let's investigate a little bit what this mincha is about. What's the deal with this mincha son? You'll see what I mean. But the way we're going to do that is by investigating another halacha. So it looks like this. Again, this is a topic that I think I spoke about this at some point. At some point, when maybe in Sefer Mitzvahs we talked about this mitzvah. So we know that, listen, karbanos have to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash by Kahanim, right? So you have Kahanim, Levim also participate in that avodah. But you have Kanai Nara, thousands of Kahanim, thousands of Levim. How do you figure out who does what, who does when? So we know that the Chazal tell us that already from Moshe Rabbeinu there was a system of mishmaros, of watches that were set up. In other words, the Kahanim were divided up into, eventually were developed into 24 different shifts, different mishmaros they're called. And throughout the whole year, if you were part of that particular, let's say there's a few families, 7 families per mishmar, 1 family per day of that particular week, and that's how the rotation would go. So if you, a person is Cohen, part of the Mishpachas Goldstein or whatever the case may be, and your particular family, your particular mishmar is to work in the Beis Hamikdash on Chaf Daled Teves. Okay, so now you work in the Beis Hamikdash Chaf Daled Teves. All sacrifices that are brought in the Beis Hamikdash that day are your responsibility. You do it. No other kohen can just show up and say, "I want to do the avodah." You're not Goldstein, and it's not your day. So you have your right. That's your right and your responsibility to be makir of the karbanos of that particular day. Not only is it in terms of your responsibility to sacrifice those karbanos, but all the benefits that come from sacrificing a karban. Let's say the skins that come from the animal, right, or certain parts of the animal that the kahanim were able to eat. That's also divided up amongst those that sacrificed it. So it's all within that family, that mishmar. Okay. With that being said, in Marmukah number 1, there's a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. Okay. Now, if you just read this pasuk again, I don't know how the guy to read this. It's like without Torah Sheba'al Peh, the pasuk is mamish meaningless. But let me go through the pasuk, and we'll go through it the way Torah Sheba'al Peh determines it. This pasuk in Sefer Dvarim is telling us a chiddush, that this entire system of mishmaros, of having certain families and designated days, it's your day, you have to bring the carbon, and you get the particular pieces of those carbonas and so on, and no other guy can just come and take your slot. That's true for every single day of the year, except for Yom Tovim. When it comes to Yom Tovim, by the Shalosh Regalim, right, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, where all of Klal Yisrael are visiting the Beis Hamikdash, then any kohen that wants has a right to say, I also want to participate in the avodah of this particular day. That's our right. Now, to clarify, That's not only true for Yom Tovim. So in other words, if you imagine, like on Yom Tov, it means that now you have, not every client has to participate, you don't have to participate, but if you want to, you have the right to throw your hat in the ring, which means that now they would use the system of Gairolas, they would have to implement on Yom Tov would be much more complicated, much more people. So not only is this true on Yom Tov, but more specifically, it's specific to Karbonis of Yom Tov. So for example, on Sukkot, right? So there's certain Karbonis that you're bringing because it's Sukkot. But there's other Karbonis that you're bringing because it's Tuesday, right? So for example, you bring a Karban Tamid. Every single day you bring a Karban Tamid in the morning in the Beis HaMikdash. That's true every Tuesday. That Tuesday could also be a Sukkot. And then on that same Tuesday, besides it being just Tuesday, it's also Sukkot. So you're bringing certain Karbanis of Musaf, unique because it's Sukkot. So this halacha, as we're going to see, this halacha that any kohen has the right to participate in the avodah on Yom Tov, not just on Yom Tov, but Yom Tov, and specifically the Karbanis of Yom Tov. Okay, and this is all interpreted how the Gemara interprets this pasuk. So let's read it together. It says in pasuk, "V'chiyavei halevi me'achad sharecha." When a Levi, Chazal interpret it really means a kohen. Sometimes you find this, that Torah says Levi, but it really means a kohen. Kohen really mean too. V'chiyavi halevi me'achad sharecha. If a Levi comes from one of the cities of Eretz Yisrael, we call Yisrael from many cities. In other words, he's not necessarily Goldstein, and it's not Chavdal Tevis. So it's whatever it is. He happens to be a kohen. Asher Garsham, for every city he lives in. Uba b'kol avas nafshay. He has the right to come with anything he wants. In other words, he has the right to come el makam asher yivchar Hashem, to the place of the Beis HaMikdash. The shar is b'shem Hashem Elokav, and he has the right, if he so desires, he has the right to work in the Beis HaMikdash, gechol echov halaviyim, like any other of the Kahanim, Hashem, who are there as well. Now, the reason how Chazal knew that this pasuk is talking about specifically Yom Tov is because when the pasuk begins, v'chiyavi halevi me'echad sharecha, from one of your gates. Chazal said it's a little bit of an extra pasuk. Just if a kohen comes from Klal Yisrael, wherever he comes from. So Chazal understood me'echad sharecha is hinting that this is applicable only at a time where all of Klal Yisrael are coming into one gate. In other words, the time of Shalosh Regalim, where all of Klal Yisrael are coming to Yerushalayim to be able to regal. At that time, we're now amongst the pilgrims, our Kahanim. If they want to work in the Beis HaMikdash that particular day, then they have the right to do so. Chelek kechelek yechelu. The pasuk then continues. Besides working in the Beis HaMikdash, they also have the right to eat of the karbanis that were sacrificed in the Beis HaMikdash. Levanu karva la'avos. Besides the daily karbanis and the things that were done, because it happens to be a Tuesday, that is still divided up amongst the watches and amongst the mishmaras. But if it's Yom Tov and specifically Yom Tov karbanis, then they have the right to throw their hat in the ring. That's the Allah. Now, so it has to be organized, but theoretically they have the right to do that. Now we're going to see in a second, there is one exception to this. There is one non-Yom Tov carbon that still every client has the right to participate in, even though it's not a Yom Tov carbon, and that is the Lechem Hapanim. The Lechem Hapanim, we know the pasuk. It's one of the avodas of Beis HaMikdash is that every Shabbos 12 breads were baked before Shabbos, and on Shabbos the avodah it was placed on the shulchan, right, on the table inside the Beis HaMikdash, and then the following Shabbos those 12 breads from the last week were then divided up amongst the Kahanim. Now usually it's divided amongst the Kahanim that are working that particular Shabbos, but the Gemara understands that the end of this pasuk of chelek kechelek yechelu, that the Kahanim also have the right to eat of the karbanis brought in that day. The Gemara has a hard time. It's Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara says, "What is that pasuk adding?" Like, yes, once you work, whatever karbanis you work on, automatically you have the right to eat that. So, what is the pasuk adding by talking about something that the Kahanim have a right to eat on Yom Tov? So the Gemara understands that this is talking about a specific type of carbon. That all there is on that particular day is just eating. That's all there is. See, every other carbon you eat after you do so, after you sacrifice. The only thing that there's something that you're eating without doing anything is lechem hapanim. The lechem hapanim is just simply, it's there on Shabbos, now you eat it. So this is the exception to the rule. So again, here's the breakdown of the halachas. Again, the average day, if today is your slot, then you have the responsibility of sacrificing the karbanos that day, and you have the benefit of benefiting from those karbanos that you've sacrificed. If it's a yontif, if it's one of the shalosh regalim, then all kahanim theoretically have the right, to participate in the avoid of sacrificing the karbanos of yontif, and as well, they have the right to participate in eating the lechem hapanim. Even though lechem hapanim is not a yontif Indian, it's a regular Shabbos thing. That's the exception to the rule that lechem hapanim they could also participate. Okay, that's akamas. Now, all this is contained in the Mishnah in Masechah Sukkah. It's clear. Everyone got it. No. So in Marmukah number 2, the Mishnah Masechah Sukkah sort of just says everything we just said. B'shloisha prakim b'shana says the Mishnah there are 3 times in the year. You call hamishmaris Shabbos. That all watches, all different groupings of Kahanim, everyone's the same, everyone has the same equal rights to work in the Beis HaMikdash. The Emurei HaRegalim, specifically for Karbanas that are being sacrificed because of Yontif, Ubechil Lechem HaPanim. And in terms of dividing up the Lechem HaPanim, even though it's not a Yontif Karban. So that's what the Mishnah says. And those are what are the 3 times? Again, that's Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. That's the Shalosh Regalim. Mishmar Shezmane Kavua. But this is all when it comes to Yontif Tekeh Karbanis, or the exception being Lechem HaPanim. But when it comes to the Karbanis that were brought privately, or non-Yontif Karbanis, then Mishmar Shezmane Kavua, then the Mishmaris, the dividing, the different groupings is still in place. So the Mishmar that is the particular day of that Yontif, Makar Tamidim, they'll still be the ones that are only the ones allowed to bring the Talmud of that particular day, because it's not a Yontif Karban. Or Nadar Minadavis, let's say an average person just wants to bring a voluntary Karban, it's not a Yontif Karban, he's bringing his own Nadar or Nadava. So then only that Mishmar brings that. And V'shar Karban Sibar U'Makar V'Sakal. So that's the Mishnah says. Okay. So questions like this. What about the Minchas HaOmer? What about the Omer? The HaOmer, again, it's no different than any other carbon. It has to be sacrificed. Number one, someone's got to do it, right? And there's leftovers of that flour, of that barley flour that has to be baked into matzahs and so on, and the Kohanim have to eat it. So again, when was it brought? It was brought on Pesach. It was brought on the 2nd day of Pesach. And that's the only time it's brought. So is that a Yontif carbon, or is that a non-Yontif carbon? The nafkamina, the difference being is this case. Who has the right to bring the Minchas HaOmer, and who has the right to eat the Minchas HaOmer? Is it dafka that mishmar of that particular day that falls out, that the 2nd day Pesach falls out on? Or is it no? It's being brought on Yontif, so the whole, all of Kahanim have the right to do so. Now, if you ask me, I would say, if this mincha is specific, there's only one time in the entire year that you bring it, and that's on Pesach. And that's when the Torah says to bring it. Then that's a Yontif Karban. That's a Yontif Karban. So there's a Yontif Karban that's called a Karban Pesach, There's a Yontif Karban that's called the Musaf of Sukkot. And there's a Yontif Karban that's called the Minchas HaOmer. It's a Yontif Karban. That's the only time you bring it. Again, the Karban Tamid, for example, that's brought every single day, including Yom Tovim, but that's not a specific Yontif Karban. Minchas HaOmer is a Yontif Karban. There's no other day besides Yontif that you bring it. And in fact, this is the shita of a number of Rishonim, that the Minchas HaOmer is a Yontif Karban, and because of that, every kind has the right to participate or to put their name in the pot if they so choose. Take a look at Marmukah number 3. It's a Gemara in Yuma Lamed Tesem at Aleph. The Gemara says it's a well-known Gemara. The Gemara says v'nishtalcha bracha. It's talking about one of the differences between Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol in the 2nd Beis HaMikdash for 80 years. So the Gemara, he was talking about that when he was the Kohen Gadol, he was big tzaddik, Shimon HaTzadik, when he was the Kohen Gadol, so there was a lot of miracles going on. And once he passed away, miracles, there was much less miracles. So one of the miracles that was during the time of Shimon HaTzadik, says the Gemara, is Nishtalcha Bracha, that a blessing was imbued in the Omer, Uv'shtei Alechem, which was the 2 loaves of bread that was a special carbon for Shavuos, U'lechem HaPanim, and the showbread that was brought every single Shabbos, meaning that even if you only had a little piece of any of these karbanas, you'll be able to be full even from a little tiny piece. That's what the Gemara says. So the Omer had this blessing, Lechem HaPanim has this blessing, and the Shtei Alechem of Shavuos also have this blessing. Says the Taisus Rid. The Taisus Rid on the Gemara Yuma, Marmukah number 4 says that the truth is, you should know, this blessing that the food of the Beis HaMikdash would satiate, even if it's only a little bit, the truth is that was for everything. Every food that was eaten in the Beis HaMikdash had that blessing. Why does the Gemara single out these particular sacrifices of the Omer and the Lechem HaPanim and the Shtei Alechem? Nakad Hani, says the reason why we're singling out these is because because not only because these were also karbanis where the miracle was double. Not only if you ate a good handful of these things will you become full. These karbanis, as the Taisus read, are yontif karbanis. The HaOmer is a yontif carbon. It's born on the second day of Pesach. The Shtei Lechem is a yontif carbon. It's born on Shavuos. The Lechem Apanim is the exception to the rule. Even though it's not a yontif carbon, it's still divided amongst all the Kahanim if Shabbos falls out on yontif. Which means that these unique karbanis, every single Kayan could mamish be getting a tiny little crumb. And even if you get a tiny little crumb, it would still satiate you. So says the Taisus here, that's why we're pulling out these karbanis, because these karbanis were divided amongst all the Kahanim. And even though it was divided amongst all the Kahanim, the HaOmer, the Shtei Lechem, the Lechem Apanim, there was enough for everyone to go around, and whatever you got, you were able to be satiated. So it's clear from the Taisus here that one of these three karbanis which are mentioned in the Gemara is the HaOmer. And he's saying that the HaOmer was divided amongst all the Kahanim. Why? Because again, Pasha. Because it's a Yontif Dika carbon. It's a Yontif Dika carbon. It's brought on the second day of Pesach alone. That's the only time it's brought. It's a Yontif Dika carbon. If it's Yontif carbon, all Kahanim have a right to participate in it. And even though every kind is participating, which means that everyone's getting mamish a little tiny piece, Afal Pikin will be satiated. The problem is the Rambam. Okay? Usually that's how it goes. The Rambam causes the problems, but then when you chap, like the Rambam is Pasha, right? And then everyone else is there. So we'll see. So it's like this. Take a look at Marmuk number 5. Okay? Again, we're following so far. Again, the HaOmer, again, if the HaOmer is a carbon that's brought on one day and one day alone, and that is Yontif, then obviously it's a Yontif carbon. What else is there to say? It's a Yontif carbon. And if it's a Yontif carbon, it means it falls under this rule that all the Kahanim should be able to have a right to throw their hat in the ring, to bring it and to eat it. Yeah.
Let's just say chatas, right? Chatas is done after an Avera.
Yeah.
So let's say one does an Avera on Yontif itself. That means it can only be done.
No, so that'll still be that's still a non-Yontif carbon. It happens to be it's on Yontif, but it's not a Yontif carbon. It's not being obligated because of Yontif. Mm-hmm. It's being obligated because this guy didn't have Avera and he has to bring it. It happens to be it's Yontif. Mm-hmm. But it's not the Yontif is not compelling you to bring this sacrifice. But the HaOmer, Yontif is compelling you to bring the sacrifice. The reason why you're bringing it is because it's Yontif. That's what the Torah said to bring it. There's no reason to think otherwise. Okay, listen what the Rambam says in Hilchas Klei HaMikdash, okay? So the Rambam in Hilchas Klei HaMikdash in the 4th chapter in Perek Daled is talking about this idea that we're talking about, that all Kahanim have a right to participate in the karbanos of Yontif. Says the Rambam, mitzvahs asay, it's one of the mitzvahs, liyas kol hamishmaris shavim bergon. It's a mitzvah asay for all the Kahanim to have equal rights when it comes to Yontif. The kol sheyavim in a Kahanim beregel, and any kind that comes to the Beis HaMikdash on Yontif, and he wants to do the avodah, he has the right to do so. The chalak imam, and the karbanos are divided up amongst him as well. So that's what we saw. They like we don't tell him we don't tell him wait until your own slot. If it's Yontif, every kind has the right to do so. But the Rambam says the Rambam, when is that true? For karbanos are gone. That's true when it comes to the Yontif karbanos. And including in that is also dividing up the lechem apanim, as we said. And also dividing up the two breads that were sacrificed on Shavuos, also the shtei halechem. But private karbanis or karbanis that are not yontiftik, they're not brought el mishmar, only the mishmar that particular day brings it, and it's not the right to every kind. Here's the problem: once the Rambam started, the Rambam went listen, in the third line in, when the Rambam said b'medav or more, when is this halacha said? For karbanos rago, when it comes to the karbanos of Yontif. Once you say that, okay, then that's vague. What's karbanos Yontif? Whatever, we'll figure out what karbanos of Yontif are. And the Rambam then goes on to say the exception to the rule, which is lechem apanim. So far, so good. But then the Rambam specifies ubechiluk shtei halechem. He goes out of his way to enumerate a non-animal sacrifice that's a yontif carbon. In other words, what's clear from the Rambam is that when he said the original words, karbanos regalim, that this halacha applies to the karbanos of yontif, what he meant is animal karbanos. And then he's going on to talk about non-animal karbanos that are also, that this halacha applies, which is lechem apanim, and the shtei halechem of atzeres. So the question is, if the Rambam is getting so specific, and he's saying that this halacha applies to yontif karbanis. What do I mean by yontif karbanis? Well, if it's animal karbanis or even non-animal karbanis, and he specifies what's a non-animal carbon, what's a flour carbon, a yontif flour carbon, which is the 2 loaves of bread that were offered on Shavuos. Why not mention the HaOmer? See, on the Mishnah, in Marmukah number 2, the Mishnah, you can't ask such a question, because the Mishnah wasn't getting into specifics. The Mishnah just said, all sacrifices of yontif. So in that, you can say the Minchas HaOmer is also included, just as the 2 breads of Shavuos are also included. But once the Rambam is interested in being more specific, and the Rambam is now telling us, I want to tell you specifically what's an example of karbanis of yontif. And he says animal karbanis and non-animal karbanis, such as the 2 loaves of Shavuos. Well, once you're getting specific and you're giving me examples of non-animal karbanis that are yontif karbanis, then why are you stopping at the 2 loaves of Shavuos? What about the Minchas HaOmer? This is in fact a question that the Mefarshim ask in the Rambam, and it would sound from the Rambam, the fact that he is not mentioning the Minchas HaOmer as an example of a flour offering that's a yontif carbon, it sounds like, according to the Rambam, it's not a yontif carbon. It's not a yontif carbon. More than that, if you take a look at, let's skip 6, go to Marmukah number 7. In Hilchas Tamidim and Musafim, the Rambam over there in Hilchas Tamidim and Musafim is talking about how the Minchas HaOmer was sacrificed. So it's a whole long thing. The Rambam goes with it's in great detail how it was ground up and how it was made and the whole process. And then at the end, the kaimetz. So Rambam says you sacrifice it like usual flour offerings, which means that you take a fistful of flour and you burn it on the mizbeach, umaktir. Va'ashar nechel kahanim, and the rest of the oimer is eaten by the kahanim. Kishiyori kol menachas, no different than any other mincha that's brought. Weekday. So the Rambam seems to say, and he's saying it specifically, that the Minchas HaOmer was eaten like any usual mincha that was brought in the Beis HaMikdash, which means to the Kahanim of that particular mishpah. Which means?
Well, we get carbon musaf on Shchadish.
So that was
the Mishra of the day.
So that's a yontif carbon for sure.
Not one of the it goes to the Mishra of the day.
Wait 1 second, what did you say?
A carbon musaf on Shchadish goes to the Mishra of the day.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's the Mishra of the day. Yeah. If it's relevant to anything but the Mishra of the day gets it.
Yeah.
The Omer is not Pesach.
The Omer is Pesach.
It's not a carbon Pesach.
Why not? Why is it not a carbon Pesach?
It's relative to shoes.
Say it again.
It's relative. It's not the carbon of the
Okay,
day.
so
It's not the first day of Yontif.
So what? It's on the first day of Yontif. The Musaf of Sukkot is throughout all 7 days of Sukkot. The Musaf of Pesach is throughout all the 8 days.
You don't bring the carbon a Minchas HaOmer.
True, but you already no, it's like this. Who has day 4 of Pesach? There's Karbani Musaf that are brought because of Pesach. There's Yontif Karbanis? Yeah. Okay, so clearly, when we're defining the Yontif carbon, it doesn't have to be only the first day of Yontif. As long as these are Karbanis that are being compelled to bring it because of Yontif, that's called the Yontif carbon. So Minchas HaOmer is a Yontif that's being brought Dafka on the 2nd day of Pesach, and Yontif requires the Minchas HaOmer to be brought. So here again, so what do we have so far? You have the Taisus Rid on one side saying, well, to me it sounds pretty simple since the Taisus Rid. When is the Minchas HaOmer brought? There's only one day of the entire year Minchas HaOmer is brought, and that's Dafka on Pesach. So guess what? It's a Pesach carbon. If it's a Pesach carbon, it means every kind has the right to participate. Says the Rambam, no. What are you talking about Pesach carbon? It happens to be, it's a Tuesday. It's not a Pesach carbon. How's it not a Pesach carbon? That's the only time you bring it, it's a Pesach. It's the only time you bring it. Why not?
Because it's only 1 yontif out of 3.
So it's true. It is true that it's not something that you find on Shavuos and Sukkot as well. But it doesn't say that in the halach that it has to be something that is common to all karbanos. Give an example. The musaf of Sukkot is different than the musaf of Pesach.
Much more.
So it's not. There are unique karbanos. The shtei alachem, the 2 loaves that are brought on Shavuos, are only brought on Shavuos, and that for sure is a yontif carbon. So you see, it doesn't have to be, to define something as a yontif carbon, doesn't have to be something that's true on every yontif. It doesn't have to be something that's true only on the first day of yontif. If this is a sacrifice which we're compelled to bring because of yontif, then that means it's a yontif carbon. And so why are we bringing the ayman? No, because it's Pesach. That's why we're bringing it. Okay, so let me explain. So some of you guys were hinting to this. Here's the conclusion. When you count Sefiras over, so we daven nusach Sfar. So what's the nusach? What do we say? Hayom, whatever it is. La Omer. And Ashkenazim, the Ramah asks to say La Omer. By the way, Agav, it's interesting. Who celebrates Lag B'Omer mostly? Chassidim and Sfardim. So why do we call Lag B'Omer? We should call Lag B'Omer. Ashkenazim that don't celebrate Lag B'Omer, they should call it Lag B'Omer. No, those are Shah. They shouldn't. They asked the tzaddikim. Yeah, very good. There you go. So they asked one of the tzaddikim is. So one of the tzaddikim said the reason is because the Yortzeit, Lag B'Omer is not the Yortzeit of Reb Shimon, it's also the Yortzeit of the Ramah. Tak in Poland, the minhag was they couldn't get to Eretz Yisrael for Lag B'Omer, so they would go to the Ramah's kever to celebrate Lag B'Omer. So we'll cover the Ramah, Paskins bih. So the minhag is to call Lag B'Omer. Let me ask you something. What does the word mean when we say Le'omer versus Be'omer? So the simple pshat is what? You bring the Omer on the second day of Pesach, and now you start counting. So you're counting, this is day 4 since the Omer. This is day 4 towards the Omer, right? This is day 5 to the Omer. The Omer meaning is the carbon that was born on the second day of Pesach, and now we're 14, 15 days to the Omer. That's the word, Le'omer. That's what Le'omer means too. It's like, I see the Omer from a distance. That Omer is on the second day of Pesach. I'm now 15 days away from it. Le'omer. What does it mean? Hayoim Chamish Asar Yoim. Today is the 15th day. Be'omer. What do you mean in the Omer? What does it mean in the Omer? What does it mean? What does it mean? It's a simple touch. The answer is, what you see from that nusach, and I'm not saying that that's a machlekes between these nuschais, but what you see from that nusach is that the Minchas HaOmer is not a carbon of the second day of Pesach. See, if the Mincha of the Omer was a Mincha, the second day of Pesach, then it doesn't make any sense to count the Be'omer. The answer is, it's true, it's a Mincha that is being offered on the second day of Pesach, but it's a sacrifice that's being offered on behalf of this entire time period that begins from the second day of Pesach, that brings you till Shavuos. And we are in the 15th day, Be'omer, within that time period that the Omer is being sacrificed for. That's the simple type of what it means when you're counting Be'omer. Even if we count Le'omer, we're not disagreeing with that premise. We're just saying Le'omer because that's practically when it was offered as on the second day of Pesach. But the nusach of that the Ramah Paskins, that nusach of Be'omer tells us that the Omer is not a carbon which was brought because it's the second day of Pesach. The Omer was brought on the second day of Pesach because that is the beginning of a time period that it is encapsulating, that it is sort of bringing under its auspices, which is the second day of Pesach till Shavuos. When you look at that time period, is that a yontif? No, it's not. It's predominantly not yontif. Yes, it happens to be that the beginning, the first beginning of that time period is the second day of Pesach. But it's not the Shalosh Regalim. When's the Shalosh Regalim? Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. The weeks in between Pesach and Shavuos are not the Shalosh Regalim. So says the Rambam, don't look at it. Why are you being so simple-minded? Don't look at, okay, the Omer is being brought on the second day of Pesach. Okay, fine, so it's a yontif carbon. It's not. That's not what the Omer is. The Omer, yes, it's being brought on the second day of Pesach, but when you count Sefira, you count Ashkenaz, they count Be'omer, which means that it's a carbon that's being brought on behalf of this time period between Pesach and Shavuos. That time period between Pesach and Shavuos is not a yontif. So says the Rambam, the Omer is not a yontif carbon. It's not a yontif carbon. It's a carbon that's being brought on behalf of 7 weeks that bridge between Pesach and Shavuos, but it's not yontif. It's not Shalosh Regalim. So because of that, says the Rambam, when they sacrificed the Omer, the only Kahanim that had the right to demand to sacrifice it were the Kahanim of that Mishmar. And the only Kahanim that had the right to demand to eat it were the Kahanim of that Mishmar. Because it's not a yontif carbon. Again, if the carbon of the Omer was what was, we completely look at it as a second day Pesach, and that's entire universe is just a second day Pesach, and it's a yontif. It's being brought on yontif, so there's no reason to think it's not yontif. It's not a yontif carbon. But once we understand, based on the nusach of the Omer, that the carbon Omer is not, you can't look at it just as a second day Pesach carbon. This is a carbon that's being brought on behalf of a time period that encompasses the vast majority of that time period is not yontif. So this is not a yontif carbon. So that's the explanation. 1 second. That's why the Rambam holds now the Rambam is very plush. It's very plush. Of course, it's not a yontif carbon. Now the problem is, what in the world Tais Rid talking about? So Tais Rid is going to have like a fundamental machlek, like what's the carbon Omer? So if the carbon HaOmer is a carbon that's being brought on behalf of this time period between Pesach and Shavuos, this is not the Shalosh Regalim. Pesach is Shalosh Regalim. Shavuos is Shalosh Regalim. What's in between Pesach and Shavuos is not Shalosh Regalim. So if the HaOmer is being brought on behalf of this in-between time period, then why in the world does it say it's Taka hold that it's a Yontif carbon? Why would it be divided amongst all the Kahanim? Yeah.
Is it possible to answer, Frank, with the Rov's Torah yesterday, what is the nucleus between Pesach and Shavuos? Is it Pesach?
Yeah.
That's we're Yotzim Mitzrayim.
The answer is yes.
I don't want to explain.
No, the answer is yes. No, yes. The answer is yes. That's the answer. I'll explain. So okay, fine. So I can't. That's as far as you could deal with Enigla, because Enigla there's no way to explain Enigla how the Shalosh Regalim are beyond Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. This time between Pesach and Shavuos is not Yontif. It's not Yontif. So the only way you can say is maybe that's what maybe the Tosfos disagrees with the Rambam on the whole premise. So maybe he holds that the HaOmer is it's not on this time period, but anyway, now you're talking about a huge machlokes, what the HaOmer is. Unlike
the Sefira, the Ibn Nigla is a machlokes, and if Sefiras HaOmer, it's really related to the HaOmer.
True. But at the end of the day,
so
it's true.
It's not the carbon, there's one carbon. It's not the Sefira, that's a second side.
L'maisa from the Nusach of HaOmer, which even the Rishonim that say that you should count HaOmer, they don't start saying you're fundamentally wrong when you say HaOmer. Everyone, halach l'maisa. If you daven Nusach Sfard and you count accidentally the right day, but you say HaOmer, you're definitely Yaitzer. There's no. It's not. This is not a fundamental issue. Like the Mishabura even says. He says most Achronim say to say HaOmer. Say whatever they do in the shul. That's what you do. It doesn't make a difference. If the difference between Lit HaOmer and HaOmer is like this fundamental thing, what is the carbon HaOmer about? And that's a big deal. We don't want to make such a big deal of it. So what's the Yisod of the Tosfos? So the answer is, this is where you need Pimus HaTorah. The Rizal reveals to us what is Bechlal, this time period that we're in right now. I spoke about this on the first days of Yontif a little bit, so there's like 3 of you that were there. What is your Sefiras? What is your Sefiras? So the Rizal said like this. The Rizal revealed that how did Yetzias Mitzrayim happen? Yetzias Mitzrayim, let's understand very quickly, Yetzias Mitzrayim wasn't just we were stuck in Egypt, we have to get out of Egypt. For that to happen, Rebbeinu Shalom could have, okay, so just leave, we're finished. The problem with Mitzrayim wasn't just that we're physically in Egypt. The problem with Mitzrayim is that we were mamish in Mitzrayim. Mamish, the tomb of Mitzrayim was enmeshed in Nishmas Yisrael to the point where you cannot, even spiritually, you cannot identify the difference between Nishmas Yisrael and Nishmas Mitzri. Moshe Rabbeinu himself, in the pasuk, when he was escaping Paro and he goes to the house of Yisrael, he's called when Yisrael asked his daughters like what happened, so how do you get home so quickly? They call him an Ish Mitzri. Such a thing? In Chumash, Moshe Rabbeinu is called an Ish Mitzri. It's Shemosek. It's called an Ish Mitzri. Means the tomb of Mitzrayim was mamish in that. And the Rebbeinu Shalom understood, however this works, that even though usually the way to get out of the way of growth is what? Tzivislach. Slowly, step by step. But the Rebbeinu Shalom knew, b'chachmasei al yoina, it's an impossibility. Any level of light that I give to the Jewish people, said the Rebbeinu Shalom, when they're in Mitzrayim, little rays of light is going to become lost in the unbelievable chayshech that they're submerged in. Therefore, the only eitz the Rebbeinu Shalom had was, according to the language of the Arizal, was to give Klal Yisrael immediately, instantaneously, Pesach night, godless. Not a little bit of ray of light to claw your way out of the abyss slowly, but to instantaneously transform the Jewish people from what? From being enmeshed in Mitzrayim to be on the level of standing by our Sinai. Instantaneously. And when that godless hanefesh, so notice what happened Pesach night, what's really happened Pesach night, is that the Rebbeinu Shalom injected you with like growth hormones, like quickly, and it was legal. So the Rebbeinu Shalom mamish changed you from being a kadin shebektanim, a small, tiny person spiritually that's completely lost in whatever your Mitzrayim is. The whole day of Pesach night is that instantaneously you transform from a kadin shebektanim to a gadol shebekdolim. And at that moment, the gadlus hanefesh that's injected within you, Pesach night, allows there to be a breaking free of the klip of Mitzrayim, albeit for a day. Because now you're altogether a different person. But that was only, said the Rizal, that was only to get you started, to get you out of that crazy headspace that's called Mitzrayim. But now the Rebbeinu Shalom, what he wants you to do is to reacquire that light, to reacquire that godless throughout the time period of Sefiras HaOmer. And this is what we find in the Kisvei Ari and the Kavanas of Rashash, is that every single day of Sefiras HaOmer, with all the Kavanas of Sefiras HaOmer, is a 49th of Pesach night. And literally, over the Sefiras HaOmer, you are rebuilding within yourself the infrastructure that you experienced instantaneously Pesach night. From the lens of Pnimius HaTorah, Sefiras HaOmer is Pesach. It's mamish Pesach. It's not a separate thing that's bridging Pesach to Shavuos. Das is Pesach. The whole meaning that you were given as a gift Pesach night is what you are literally reacquiring slowly but surely throughout Sefiras HaOmer. It is Pesach. So we have this machlokes. Everyone agrees. Let's go with let's break it down. A yontif carbon, all kahanim have the right to participate. Aleph, Beis. The Minchas HaOmer is a yontif, it's a carbon that's being brought on behalf of this time period of Sefiras HaOmer. So therefore, because of that, says the Rambam, it's not a yontif carbon. Sefiras HaOmer is not a yontif. Pesach is a yontif. Shavuos is a yontif. Sukkot is a yontif. Sefiras HaOmer is not a yontif. Says the Taisus Rid, Avad it's a yontif. Wait a minute, how's it a yontif? In Pnimius, it's mamish yontif. It's mamish Pesach. It's one of the Shalosh Regalim. It's mamish one of the Shalosh Regalim. Not on the outside, but on the inside. In Pnimius, it's mamish Shalosh Regalim. And this is why it's the Rambam and the Taisus that have this disagreement. Everyone knows that the Rambam is coming from that world of Chitzonius, from that world that's of philosophy, not nigla and disconnected from Pnimius HaTorah. Whereas the world of Taisus, for example, the word Taisus comes from the word Yosef, right? So it's well known by the tzaddikim that the Rambam versus Taisus, for example, and this is Taisus Rid. Taisus is always coming from the world of Yosef Tzaddik. It's very much Yosef Tzaddik oriented. It says in Pasuk regarding Yosef that he was Ben Zekunim. He was the son of Yaakov Avinu's old age. The Targum Onkelos doesn't translate Ben Zekunim as old age. Bar Chakim. That Yosef Tzaddik was the one that Yaakov transmitted Chachmas HaEmes, the true wisdom. It means Pnimius HaTorah. Yosef versus David. David, the pasuk describes as halacha k'mais v'chol makom. David Melech means practical. David Melech is the king. David Melech takes care of the practical, of the practicalities. Yosef Tzaddik means the world of Chacham. Yosef Tzaddik is an inner place. He's completely unknown. The brothers can't even recognize him. He's b'chlal, a mystery. Yosef Tzaddik is all mystery. The Rambam is the soul of Mashiach ben David. The Rambam is connected to David HaMelech. The Rambam gathers together all the halachas of Torah Sheba'al Peh into one place, just like Mashiach ben David will gather Klal Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam therefore is connected to what? The Pshat, the Nigla, the halacha, L'maisa. L'maisa, Sefiras HaOmer is not Pesach. Sefiras HaOmer is not Yontif. It's somewhere in between. It bridges Pesach and Shavuos, but it's not Yontif itself. Therefore, according to the Rambam, the base in his Sharash Neshama, which is connected to Pshat, the Rambam says, you want to know what Sefiras HaOmer is? Sefiras HaOmer is not Yontif. Therefore, the Minchas HaOmer, which is a yontif brought on behalf of this time period, is not a yontif carbon. But the Taisus Rid, which comes from the world of Taisus, which is the world of Yosef Tzaddik, the world of mystery, the world that's hidden, the world that's misunderstood. So because of that, the world of Yosef, the world of Taisus, sees things from the world of Pnimius, and from the world of Pnimius, Sefiras HaOmer is Pesach. It's mamish Pesach. It's what was happened on Pesach is just being stretched over 49 days to reconstitute and to rebuild. From the world of Taisus Rid, Avada, this is a yontif, this is a carbon that's being brought on behalf of Sefiras HaOmer. Sefiras HaOmer is yontif. It's the same thing. Therefore, it's considered to be a yontif carbon, and it's divided amongst all the Kohanim.
The
Lamaisa, I have no idea. Machlekes Taisus Rid in the Rambam. Neither of them lived with the base of English. I don't know Lamaisa. I don't know. Lamaisa is Machlekes Taisus Rid in the Rambam. Halach Lamaisa, I'll tell you something. In the ranks of the grove, we find this that. In Chazal, we know there's such a thing as Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. What's interesting is that the Rambam, where he talks about the halachas of Mashiach, there's no mention of Mashiach ben Yosef. It's just one person, Mashiach ben David. So the Kabbalah says from the Vilna Gaon said that the whole inyan of there being a divide between Mashiach ben Yosef one side, Mashiach ben David on the other, that's Vayter Galas inyan. That's those two Mashiachs in two different personalities. That's getting us closer to Gul, but it's still Galas. What's ultimately Gula is that it's Mamash one. Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David are Mamash one. And this is a little bit what we're doing right now, which is what? Explaining something in Nigla explaining a halacha in Nigla based on Pneumius. Right? That itself is Yichud between Mashiach ben Yosef, which is Pneumius, and Mashiach ben David, which is Nigla, bringing the two together. And so we should be Zaycha on Rosh Chodesh, which is the whole Yontif of Rosh Chodesh, is a Yontif that we're celebrating as a reflection of what's going to be with Mashiach when Mashiach comes. So when Mashiach comes, we're going to realize that there's no divide between Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And that's what we're trying to do right now. What does that mean in the Beis HaMikdash by Minchas HaOmer? I have no idea. Unless it's an edge, we'll figure it out. I don't know. But Maisa, for us, it means that we have to believe that everything we're involved in, even though it might seem to us as Nigla, you should know it's mysterious. And everything that's mysterious and you don't understand, you should know at some point you will, and it's Nigla. That's the two worlds of Mashiach and Mashiach to experience that.